So I want to keep this pretty informal. I've done this demo a bunch of times. If you've seen the webinars that we put out, it's going to be very familiar. So I don't want to just bore you and walk through the webinar demo for the 100th time. What I'd really like to do is just use that as sort of the key points, and as we go through it, open it up for discussions and ask questions. Again, very informal. We want this to be a back and forth. One thing to keep in mind is that I'm a product manager and not an engineer. We do have a couple of engineers here that'll try to help answer questions in their areas. But where I can help more is maybe why we made decisions, why we didn't do other things, kind of where we're going in the future. The future statements, though, I will stress, I'm not making any promises here. Things may change, but I can just kind of give you an idea of maybe why we made some of the decisions we did. So with that, I will just kind of kick off and we'll launch FileMaker 17. Can I first make the assumption that everyone in the room has installed and played with 17 a little bit? Is that a yes? Yes, okay. So this is when you launch the product, our new launch center. And I realize we've touched our launch center now, I think in the last 3 or 4 releases. And the reasoning for that is because we really want to dial this in with our users. We did a lot of usability feedback after the 16 release and got a lot of really good feedback on where people were struggling, where people were getting lost. And by people in this case, I actually mean end users in particular. Now, I know for many of you, you'll skip the launch center altogether. You'll have either a launcher file or direct links to your files. But a lot of our customers, their end users are coming in, and then the first thing that they see is the launch center. And oftentimes, they were getting sort of lost in the different tabs. And some of the feature requests that we were getting back from people were things that were actually already doable in the existing UI that we had. They just weren't able to find it. So that's what kind of triggered us to redo things a little bit, really make this the hub where we see our main app icons. One of the things, talking a little bit of the future of what we're setting up for, is eventually we want you guys to be able to pre-populate this yourselves. So you wouldn't necessarily have to create a launcher file if you didn't want to. You could, during the deployment, pre-populate this with the apps that you want your users to use, instead of having that back and forth where you've got to go and physically set up their machine or send them repeated emails that tell them how to get to your app. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. I think it's pretty straightforward, but I just want to give you a little bit of the background. The big change came in this part of the screen, which is our Create tab. And this is where customers come in and create apps, obviously. And I don't want to spend too much time unless there's questions here. I really want to focus on our new starter apps. There's a little bit of magic that may not be apparent going on here behind the scenes. We've got 2 categories of apps, the starter apps and the sample apps. The sample apps, these are the ones that we've been shipping with the product for quite a while. And when you create one of these, what's actually happening is there's a FileMaker file that we've pre-built that's localized in all of our languages. It's an FMP12 file that's embedded into FileMaker's application. And when you hit create, we're actually just making a copy of that, and then you're off running. But our new sample apps, our new starter apps rather, they're very different. So at this point in time, as an example, I don't have an FMP12 assets file that exists on disk. There is no FMP12 asset file that's embedded into our app any longer. What's actually sitting behind this is a series of XML files. One of the files has all the structure to the app, and another file, or another series of files rather, have the localized strings for the app. And what we're doing at the point of me hitting create, I'm actually going to do the meetings one here. When I hit create and I save it, in that moment that you just witnessed flash by, what we actually did was we took those 2 XML files and combined them and built this FMP12 file on the fly. And that's important because it's setting us up for the future where, for a lot of things, one, potentially we have the ability for you guys to start creating these apps that we embed in, all built in XML. It gives you better ability, just like we're using it from a localization standpoint. Instead of having an app, multiple apps, each for each of my languages that I have to build, and any change that I make, I need to go into each one. I make my main structure, and then I separately have all of my strings stored in separate XML files. But the eventual goal for this XML is to expose it to you all so that it really helps you with versioning control and being able to make updates to your apps on the fly and actually be able to inject that XML, just like you're going to see an example of me do in just a moment. So in this release in 17, the starter apps are important for us for new customers. But for you guys in this room, I wanted you to sort of understand what's going on behind the scenes, because this is just sort of our first task or our first baby step. Any questions so far? If you do, just raise or yell out. So as I mentioned, this file was just created on the fly using the XML. And let's say we wanted to extend this farther. So I'm going to hide my side panels here. And we are going to start tracking some attachments to go along with this, these meetings. So right now, I'm just making some room so that I can add my attachments portal. And if I come up to my portal creation and we draw it out on the layout, we see this new add-on tables option. This will appear in almost all cases for you. So we're looking for the primary key fields that we have built into the tables that we create now. But we also have some logic that looks for fields we think are probably primary key fields. And if we can find them, then we'll display this UI. Because what we're going to end up doing is actually, again, using XML, inject these changes or this new table layouts and scripts into my file and build the relationship automatically based on that key. So in this particular case, it's one of our starter apps. We know that we've got that ID field in there. So we see our new add-on table option. And when I choose it, we've got a list of add-ons that I can choose from. Again, none of this exists as FMP12 files. This is all XML behind the scenes. And that's what allows us to, like, let's say when I select attachments and give it a name, it brings in a portal that was predefined for me. It also brings in the new table, all the fields that I need, and builds the relationship for me. So we've got our foreign key and our primary key already mapped up. So this is a good bit of magic for someone that's just coming into the platform. They don't understand relationships yet. They know that they need to extend their custom map, or they really want to prove to themselves that they can extend the custom map and it can do the things that they need it to do. And we don't want them to get hung up on the relationship building yet. And so that's sort of the first bit of magic that this will allow. But I'll let your imaginations kind of go with what we can do in the future, where we open this up where you could create your own add-on tables that are really your own add-ons that could be bringing in anything, tables, layouts, scripts as you need them. You could really build out some really interesting little modules that you could attach to your apps or share with others. Any questions on how any of that works? You guys are being too easy today. Okay, so that was our add-on tables. There's one other little bit of XML that we're exposing, and then I will shut up about XML for a little bit. But that's our default fields. I know that there was a lot of excitement around this when we first launched, and there was a lot of questions around it as well. But just to see it in action, if I create a new table, so this is my test table, instead of being blank, we're actually including 5 fields by default. And you can actually see I've been messing with my default fields because the normal naming convention is primary key. We wanted this one in there because we know that in almost all cases when you create a table, you're going to need a primary key. We also added some things like the creation and modification fields. And this was really because you're probably going to need these as well. And if you're a new customer, you're not going to know that you're going to need these until it's too late. So we wanted to put all this stuff in there to begin with. But as I alluded to, you can go in here and customize this, as I've done here, where I've got my _p key. And to do this, you have to modify a file called defaultfields.xml, and there's a place that you place that inside of the on your hard drive in the shared directory for FileMaker. We've actually created a really helpful knowledge-based article that outlines what the default fields are, how you can customize them, so what changes, or I'm sorry, first off, where you put the custom file, what types of changes you can make, and we even include a copy of the XML file so that you can just plop that in. If you didn't want to have the behavior at all, where you just had no default fields coming in, you could just create a blank version of this file and stick it in this directory, and then it would give you the same behavior as you had before. Or you can do what I've done here, which is customize this file to match your own naming conventions. So instead of primary key, or _p key, let's change this back to primary key. And now when I create another new table, we'll call test2, we get our 5 fields and our new naming convention. So it is possible to add your own fields to this. We are a bit limited though in this release. We don't have full XML representation. That is what we're building towards, where we'll have all the field options, all the all the nitty-gritty details of the field mapped out. In this release, we really focused on the ones that we were going to need for the default fields that we knew that we wanted to deliver, as well as what we needed for the add-on tables and starter apps. And so that's, again, sort of our first little baby step into this world, but it's setting us down a really exciting path. Yes, a question, Clara. Say that one more time.
Support.filemaker.com. I see that page that you were referring to.
Sure. So the question was about the page that I was showing. So this is one of our knowledge base articles. I'm a little surprised that it's not showing me the number. Hold on, let me reload it. If you search for default fields in our KB, you'll find it. I'm not sure why it's not giving me the KB number. It's sticking me in the web browser or the mobile version for some reason. But yeah, if you just search for default fields, it should be the very first one in the list. Question?
Are any of the other XML structures going to be exposed in this release?
So the question was, are any of the other XML structures going to be exposed in this release? And no, not yet. So that is something that we're looking at for the future. I can't promise the form that it'll take, but we're definitely looking at building out all new XML that we may make available as a DDR version, as an example, as well as script steps that would give you control over creating add-on tables like I was just doing, or that I just used rather. As well as adding or serializing and deserializing your file to XML and back. So those are all the kinds of things that we're exploring for the future. But in this release, the only XML that's exposed to you guys is the default fields, and then we're using it behind the scenes. Yep.
When I traditionally copy and paste a field from one table to another table, am I copying and pasting an XML file, or am I doing something that is FileMaker right here?
So we do have, it's different XML. Our clipboard is using XML, but it's different than our syntax that we're using here. But yes, that is what's happening behind the scenes. Did I see another hand, or is that everyone? Oh, yeah.
When the migration system creates a clone, does it use XML, or is it actually just creating a clone of it?
It's creating a clone from my understanding. Yeah.
It's a clone.
Yeah. Okay.
It works with the file directly. It doesn't do any XML.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. And I'm gonna open up the contacts app. And we're gonna go back into layout mode because I want to talk a little bit about the changes we've made to the document workspace. If you're familiar, I mean, I know you're all familiar with how we used to dump you into layout mode when you first started with FileMaker. In FileMaker 16, for example, you would land on a blank screen and the field picker would come up. And we did a lot of usability testing and watching users, and what we saw pretty much universally is as soon as they saw that blank screen and the field picker come up, before even thinking about anything, they would close it, almost 100% of the time in all the usability testing we did. And it was really infuriating because then we sat there and watched them struggle for a couple of minutes trying to figure out where they're supposed to go to create fields. And what we found was this was happening for a couple of reasons. One, the name and the look of the field picker subconsciously was messing with people. We named it field picker, and when someone is in the mode of operation of creating fields, they're not picking fields. That was part of the reason they dismissed it. The other was just the look and feel. The HUD and it being sort of dark and gray made them feel like it wasn't important. And I mean, our brains are so wired for pattern recognition, and they're coming from another application. They look at this, their brain is, again, even before they're able to fully think it out, is just dismissing it as a pattern they don't recognize, and then they end up getting stuck. And so that's why we're doing something that's very similar to what other apps has, where you've got a panel on the left-hand side, where you've got objects that you're pulling out and bringing into your layout. Now, I will say up front that we are still dialing in or still listening to feedback on the way that the window sizes itself going between browse mode and layout mode. But what we found so far, at least, is that especially new customers, this just feels natural. For some of us, and myself included, when I first started working on it, it took me a little bit of time to get past the muscle memory of what I've been used to. But having it here on the left-hand side and always having it available to me has been a great help. The other thing, this was another usability thing that influenced this, and this was something that experienced and long-term people raised as well as a concern, is that the old field picker was not resizable. And so many of us have long naming conventions that made the field picker essentially useless. And so that was why it was important to us to do things like resizing the side panel. We also brought the layout object window into this as well. The layout objects, manipulating layout objects in groups is something that took us quite a while. We actually started it back in FileMaker 15. And in order to get it to you guys as fast as possible, it was the easiest to do it in a floating window. But what that meant was it was something that was a small icon, on that top bar. It was very easy for people to overlook. So what we wanted to do here was surface it, make it more readily available, bring it out to more people's attention. Because the folks that did find this, it was one of the largest features or most appreciated features in 16. So we really wanted to bring it out and let it shine here. We'll come back to some changes we made to that in just a moment, but we also brought the inspector in as well. I wish I could get rid of this. This out somewhere. Okay. So we brought the inspector in to the right as well. This one was also driven by usability feedback. I think everyone can relate to the "where the hell is my inspector" fun that you go through, where you're hitting Command-I until it flashes. There's definitely still cases where you want a floating inspector, you want to see all the different tabs potentially, but we found that this is just always having it there, especially when I've got large displays or multiple displays, is super helpful. I will say though that, I want to stress the fact that this is sort of our, again, another sort of starting point with our document workspace. Eventually we want to really modernize FileMaker and get a lot of those modal dialogues that we've got today, bring some of that stuff into the main document workspace where it makes sense. There's a lot of work that we want to do with the inspector as an example to make it a little bit more intelligent and not have to hunt down through all the different tabs to find the option that you need. We've even done some stuff that we're not really exposing here yet to get us set up for the future where we're bringing that kind of information in. I think a great example of something we're thinking about is being able to see part of the relationship graph here and be able to really hammer home context and how important that is in FileMaker. And so we needed to sort of set the document workspace up in such a way that we'll have space for that in the future. Any comments, questions, concerns? Where I'm at so far? We're gonna get through this really quick. So, okay, I want to come back to the layout object window for a moment, or more specifically, the managing grouped objects. So this is a very typical FileMaker file. I can click on the button space here. I'll make this a little larger. And it takes me over to this layout, and I can come back. This is pretty typical. Most of us have built something like this. But where it becomes tricky is now I've got this thing all grouped together. And if I want to manipulate this group, in the old days, pre-16, of course, you had to ungroup it and regroup it, and that meant you would lose any button actions and all that fun stuff. Now, we did make it better where now you can go in right through the layout object window and select things. And that's helpful, but there's times where maybe you have that closed, or really just you're looking right at it. This is the thing that I want to select. So this is going off to the layout object window is sort of a side path for me. So that's why we wanted to introduce the ability to drill directly down at the layout level into objects, or groups rather, to select objects. So for example, I've got this group selected, and we can see that because of the blue outline. But if I click again on this job title field, we get the dashed outline now, and now I've selected that particular field. And from there, I'm free to do anything I want to it. I can change the color scheme. I could delete it, and that doesn't disrupt my group at all. And then I can select other objects and resize them or redistribute them or move them around. If I select an object inside of a group and then I move it outside the bounds of the group, it'll actually resize the group. So it gives me a lot more flexibility, it gives me a lot more control. It lets me work with grouped objects just like I would any other object. This is something that we've also, even so far, we've only been out for about a month. We've gotten really good feedback on, just because it just feels more natural. And for customers coming from other products, it meets that need that they, or that meets that expectation that they have coming from other products. Any questions? Yes.
Is there any option with the group object like this to remove the item from the group without ungrouping the whole thing?
So not yet, but we are aware of that. It's not the, I will say that it's not something that we're looking at for the next most immediate release, but it is on our list of things to keep track of. Adding and removing objects into the group is something we hear a good bit as well. Yes?
Didn't you just say if you drug that out of the
It's staying in the group.
It's staying in the group. It's moving, it's resizing the group. What he's asking for is I want to take it out of the group and put it not in the group, or put maybe even potentially put it in a different group.
What happens if you cut and paste it?
So it will come out and be its own thing now. But so you sort of have the out, I guess, is sort of an indirect way. But what I can't now do is paste it back into the group. So that's the, yeah, we don't have that yet.
You're saying it's no longer part of the group.
If what we're saying is if we cut this field and paste it on the layout, it's, if and when I look at my layout object window or pane, you can see now it's no longer part of this group, but I have no way to take this object and drag it and put it into this group and add it. I don't think so. No, it's still, because it doesn't know that it doesn't know your intent of putting it into the group at that point.
There's no travel there.
No, there's none of that at this point works. It's only going to look at what's already been grouped when you grouped it manually. Did you say something, Keith? Sorry, I cut you off.
There's no drop for it.
Yeah, there's no drop.
There was a question online, but I'm not sure if I understand. It says, it's James, because does it work the same if a script is attached?
I assume you mean, I assume he means the script is attached to the group. And if that's the case, we don't touch that at that point. The group stays the group, and then any manipulation that you're doing to the files, or I'm sorry, to the fields or objects inside of it won't impact the scripts or the programmatic visibility that you have assigned to the group itself. That's totally fine. If I want to drill into this and I want to say that make this particular field a button, I can do that, and I can attach a script to it or script triggers or anything else.
What happens if you, some people would make multiple objects a button.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens if you remove, cut one object out of that group and paste it?
The group still has the button action at that point.
Okay, so the button shrinks down to the size of the two remaining objects.
Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to ask questions, Keith.
Keith, we were saying not necessarily using the group object, just using a button to kind of group objects.
Some people used to group objects.
Yeah, people still, I would say that people still do that. I mean, if you want to do, like, for example, I see oftentimes a container field is being turned into a button so that when you tap on it, you capture a signature or something like that. So what's actually happening behind the scenes when you turn something into a button is it becomes a group. So it's the same logic there. Lost my place a little bit. Okay, so we talked through the group management stuff. I mean, the grouped object stuff. The next piece I want to talk about is what we've done to make master detail a little easier to set up. So again, using this app as an example, very traditional FileMaker, list view, form view, navigation style. And what we're seeing more and more is the request for master detail, because that's what a lot of end users are familiar with. They use Mail every day. Everyone uses Mail, whether it's on an iPad or a desktop. You're gonna have a list of Mail messages on the left and your detailed message when you select it on the right. And for people that, or for you, those of you that are familiar with FileMaker, this is something that you've been able to do for quite a while. But it did require some FileMaker tricks. You had to go in and create a self-join relationship. You then created the portal. Then you would create some scripts to handle all the special behaviors of selecting the portal row and performing finds and sorts and all that fun stuff. And so we wanted to pretty drastically reduce that overhead. And so what we've done is added a new portal option. So if we resize my layout here, and we draw a portal out, instead of choosing a related table, which in this case we don't have any, or an add-on table, which is what I showed you guys earlier, what we really want to do is show records from this current table. Most of these options are grayed out. So things like sort is not necessary because you're sorting at the record level, at the form level, just like you would normally. Same thing with filtering, as it's essentially a find. Deletion is you're actually deleting the file at that point. So most of these don't apply with this new portal type. Let's go ahead and hit OK, and I'll move first name and last name over. And now I'm done, so I can go into browse mode, and just by simply clicking around, I immediately get the behavior of a master detail style layout. Now, we introduced this as part of the portal as opposed to a new object or doing it where, you know, a layout type, because we wanted to make this available for you guys to use in other ways. And we've already seen some sort of interesting uses for the master detail. But our longer term plans is I could definitely see a future where when you create a new layout, one of our design patterns, instead of it just being form, list, report, and paper, I think is the other one, we would maybe add one that's master detail. And all it would do at that point is create a layout with this object already on it. So from a new user standpoint, they get exactly what they want, but it still stays flexible and stays customizable like you'd expect from a FileMaker object. Questions? Man, it's so easy today. You may be too easy because I'm going to run out of content quick, so we'll have to start digging into some other questions, I guess. Maybe I have to open it back up to you, Keith.
I'm curious for master detail, whether it's basically building the structure and path in the background comparable to what we were having to build manually to get this back.
Boy, I don't know that from an engineering standpoint. Daniel, I know you didn't implement this feature, but do you have any sense of that? Of how we're doing this behind the scenes? Yeah, we don't.
But it didn't change the graph or anything?
Oh no, I should have showed that. No, there's no additional, ignore this. This is my table that I created earlier. But there's no self-join relationship here, which I should say that's one of our other. I know we haven't touched the relationship graph in a while, but one of the things that we are trying to do is figure out ways to not need as much of a complex relationship graph. This is a pretty simple example. You were just creating a self-join. Yeah. Yeah, so there's, since we've got time, a little bit of what we're kind of thinking here. So obviously we do need at some point to figure out or do something with the relationship graph. This thing hasn't really been touched since FileMaker 7. And one of the big pieces that we're struggling with is, or what customers struggle with is, we've got tables that make sense when you have, you know, your pure table structure, but then you layer on top of that UI elements. A master detail is a prime example of that. There's no reason for another table of occurrence to drive UI. That just clutters up your relationship graph. So one of the first steps that we're taking is knocking down those examples. Again, this is a pretty simple one, but we're looking at other places where instead of having a table occurrence, maybe it's more of a query that you do, and that's how you drive your UI elements. And so maybe we have, and again, nothing is set in stone. I'm not making any promises. This is just kind of the things that we're thinking about is, can we move all of those UI, all of those table occurrences that were being used for UI, driving UI, get that out of the relationship graph. That alone would simplify things quite a bit. Then we've got some other ideas that I'm not ready to share yet, but that will drastically reduce the time we spend managing relationships, is the hope. Yes?
Is the master all the records in the table, or is it selection?
It's your found set, essentially. So if I come back in here and
Unlike the value list that I set.
Correct. So if I come in here and I search for my name, it immediately updates and shows me just the records that apply. So that's what I was saying. The same thing applies to, so if I do show all and I do a sort now, we'll change the name order, you can see that my portal immediately sorts appropriately. Yep.
If you allowed TOs based on script variables, or allowed us to create a table, well, not table current, but a relationship within the script step, then that would take away the need for a lot of clutter.
Yeah, that's an idea, and that's definitely something that we've explored. As I said, I'm not ready to say what we're going to do yet because we haven't decided that. But we spend a lot of time thinking about this, and there's a lot of different approaches. And the fine balance that we've got to strike is how do we substantially move ourselves forward without breaking everything that's there now, and without, if we can, doing a file format change. So that's a very tough battle that we've got with at least one hand tied behind our back. So that's where we're at right now, is still trying to think through how we want to approach this. But I hear from folks quite often that they feel like we're just ignoring the relationship graph. And that's absolutely not the case. It's just, you're seeing seeds we're planting in the product now, and it's hard to see sort of where we're going to go with all that. That's why I'm trying to give a little bit of background. But there's also just, this is a hard problem to solve, and we want to make sure that we do it right. And no arguments there. What we have to make sure, though, is that we don't want to do something that could make things a little bit better and then sort of fight our grand vision. So we want to make sure that all the pieces fit. So hear you, completely get it. And maybe that's one of the things that we do. I just don't want to commit to it yet. Yes, Keith?
Somebody asked how that new panel works.
Which new panel?
The left-hand side of the self-joining.
Oh, from a tech.
Describing it as a self-join, but
It's not really anymore, but I don't know that that I know enough from an engineering standpoint to be able to articulate that.
it's pretty simple. Every window keeps track of its found set, its sort, and other detail. And that feature is connected to it. So it's just simply using what's in the window. So what's nice about this is that in the join graph, you would set up globals and so forth to perform your filters. And globals are only used on a per window basis. So with this feature, you should be able to have two windows, perform a find for Robert and Juan, and perform a find for something else, and you'll have two different lists in those. That's not something that you do with.
Right. Not easily.
It's
You
a
have
lot.
to do a lot, right?
Like you have to have separate.
Yeah, that would be very difficult.
Yeah. But if you think about that, that's extremely powerful. You can have two windows, and without globals or anything, you can perform those finds and keep two different lists and navigate through them and show those records for each list on each window separately. So.
Yep.
By the way, you cannot put one of those in a card window, can you?
Yeah, sure you can.
Okay. That'd be one way to also let you play with it separate.
What are you trying to accomplish there?
Nothing offhand, but the card window has a separate. It's independent.
Oh yeah, it's completely independent. You're right. You could, though. The card doesn't work super well for master detail in that your focus is forced into that card. So you couldn't have like the card and then another window next to it or anything like that interact with both. But we have seen cases where, instead of using our list view or something like that, and they want to picker, they'll use the master detail. There's, I wish I could think of the example in the Go case that someone was raving about the other day. I know that they were really excited, but I can't remember exactly what the use case was. Any other questions on that stuff? Yes.
Did you say we cannot attach script to the site?
Oh,
As well as building.
these are still fields. You can still put anything in here you want. You could override the behavior. You can put, I can set up a button when you're clicking on that. It's just the default. If there's no button action and you select and you make that row active, we will automatically take you to the correct person.
It's like a subset So here I've got a list of all my customers.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And I click on Robert. And now I've got this window over here, and this other window, I've got all the Roberts.
Sure, you can do that.
Same thing. So I've got my two windows. This is my master list.
Mhm.
And this is my
Yep.
master list. That portal on the left, can you move that, or that's stuck on the left?
Oh no, this can. It just happened to be on the left. I can put this anywhere. Yeah. You can shape it any way you want. You can tell it how many rows you want. It's normal FileMaker customization. Okay, so a couple other things, little things. Let's see. We did. I have to think now. Perform script. So we changed this a little bit. This is something that we didn't really highlight too much in the webinars, but performing it based either by a list like we're doing here, or by a calculation, or by name rather, that I can specify a calculation. So instead of having a long script with a bunch of if statements to trigger which perform script you want, just do it all right here. Is there any, I'm going to switch over to Go here in a moment. Is there any other questions on the Pro side?
Right, in the script manager,
Mm-hmm.
you still can't change the size of the font.
That's correct. So there's
We don't all have 2020 video.
I hear you, and that's something we haven't touched the script workspace just again due to we've got a lot of things that we want to accomplish, and it's non-trivial, unfortunately, from what I understand. But there's a lot more that we want to do with the script workspace and give you better control over that kind of stuff, the way it looks, font size, more changes on the color schemes and things like that. Just not there yet.
Is all of this work on that? Are there touches that you want to share with us?
Everything that I showed, I mean, the master detail for sure all works perfectly in WebDirect.
Card window does not.
The card window does not. And that is something that we're very aware of. Again, non-trivial to fix. That's why we didn't bring it to WebDirect to begin with, but something that we are interested in doing in the future. It just takes, yeah, it just falls back to the standard document window. Yes, everything that I showed so far is all compatible with WebDirect. Most of what I've shown is really is all pro-centric anyway, but the master detail layouts will work just fine on WebDirect.
That master detail will not work. You won't be able to get any information from master detail
object itself, but I mean, you're at that point, you're tapping right into the record.
You're at the records already.
Right.
Now.
If you're getting ready to leave Pro, I'm curious about the launch center. How you custom
So again, this is something that we're looking at in the future. One idea that we're looking at.
it's not customizable.
Well, it's customizable in that you can add anything that you want to it. It's user customizable as far as adding apps to it. You know, I can add files that are local. Right, but what I was referring to is I want the ability for the person that's doing the deployment to be able to say, one idea is use an assisted install file and say, here are all the files that I want. So when I install, those files are already there. Those links are already there. Not yet. That's something that we're looking at. Let's see. What's the easiest way for me to do this? I guess I can just AirPlay directly from this device. And just because we're talking Go for a little bit, that doesn't mean. Oh, I do need to. You need this on the webinar, don't you? Do we want to? Let me run to my desk and I can get a cable and I can hook it up, but and take a 2-minute break.
Yeah.
All right, let's do that.
There's a great demo file with all sorts of that displays all sorts of possibilities with the master detail on the internet. I'll try to find a link for it. I saw it a couple weeks ago. A demo file showing all the cool things that you could do with a single master detail. Yeah, let me see if I can find it. I have it on disk somewhere.
Yeah.
I've used a little, but I haven't what to do.
Yeah, there's this guy who shows all sorts of crazy stuff. He's using workarounds that have been generated for
Yeah, and that is available.
last decade probably. But it,
Yeah.
demos really
Well,
well
it's standalone,
with what he's done. Yeah.
standalone. So,
The command line, right?
yeah, standalone command line.
Data migration tool. I'm going to show you that too. We're going to come back to the desktop.
He's very fast.
Yeah.
Oh, where's the cookies?
Yeah, like that reference? I like to, all of my demos have little hints of things in there. And it's funny who picks up on what. Are we all back, Rosemary? Did anyone leave? Okay. So I'm also the Go product manager, so I can talk a bit about what we've done in Go. And I put this little app together, just kind of highlight some of the new features. The first one is something that actually a few of these are sort of parody that we're bringing over what the desktop already had into FileMaker Go. We had done, the first couple of releases ago, it really was focused on getting as much parity as made sense, and I think we got most of that covered. But one area that we had missed was the autocomplete functionality. And I heard a lot of requests for this, especially in the field of medicine, because we had nurses that were trying to enter prescription names or other very, very complex doctor terms, if you would. And what they found was they were having issues with data entry mistakes, or they would do, the developer would, the best that they could do is come up with putting stuff in a value list. But then there's so many different prescription names, as an example out there, that scrolling through an extremely long list wasn't really any better. And so that was what was motivating us to bring over autocomplete from the desktop. And so what I can do now is just start typing, and you can see the FileMaker Go is going to start limiting that list, making it much easier for me to find the one that I want, making it much more efficient and quick for me to do data entry. And in this particular case, I do have a keyboard, but when you're just walking around and you've got the iPad in one hand and just your finger in the other hand, doing data entry is it's important that we make it as easy as possible. One other thing that the dev team is asking me to call out is we actually completely rebuilt the way that we're displaying value lists in Go. So if you're using very large value lists, you should even see a performance improvement. Not too much else to say around autocomplete. Any questions on that? Cool. So another bit of parity, again, that we were bringing over from the desktop was keyboard shortcuts. When Apple introduced the iPad, there was immediately a bunch of third-party keyboards out there, Bluetooth keyboards. Then they introduced this smart keyboard cover, which I see quite a few people use. And with the iPad Pro especially, it's becoming a device that's more than just consuming. It's for doing data entry. And so we want people to be efficient. And one of the things that makes people efficient is keyboard shortcuts. So if you hold Command, you'll see all the keyboard shortcuts dependent on where you are. So it's going to be dynamic. In this case, I'm in browse mode, so I see new record, for example. If I switch over to find mode, in fact, let's go ahead and do that using Command F. And I hold Command again, you can see that now it's showing new find requests. And I do believe that we're getting this from the menu name. So this will show you everything that's equivalent or that applies to that particular mode that you're in. And it's also worth noting, in addition to the smart keyboard cover, if it wasn't clear, we also support any Bluetooth keyboard. And I'm showing it on the iPad, but if you've got your Bluetooth keyboard hooked up to your iPhone, for whatever reason, it'll work there as well. Let's go ahead, since we're in Find mode, I'm going to do a search for Rick real quick to talk a little bit about the drag and drop functionality that we brought in. So Apple introduced this 2 years ago, I think, with iOS. And adoption is still kind of building up. It's not 100% through all iOS apps. But if you're using FileMaker Go 17 with an iOS app that does support drag and drop, you'll now be able to really easily exchange data, whether that's text or images, between your custom app and your third-party app. In this particular case, oops, not too far, I'm going to go ahead and use the Photos app. So I bring this off to the side, and I just grab the photo, slide it in, and drop it. Again, bidirectional, and we support text as well as images. Questions? This is built into iOS, so if you slide up from the bottom, it'll bring the dock, yeah. And then this is, it's a little hard to see on the screen. And then any of your active apps, of course, if you bring out the side panel as well, if you slide from the side on iOS, you can get to tap that way as well. Next is our get sensor function. I think that on the Go side, this is what I've heard the most excitement around, just because it lets you tap into pretty much all of the sensors that you would have access to if you're an iOS developer. And that was important to us. We want to give you guys the same level of power that an iOS developer has, but without all the fun of learning Swift or Objective-C. So I've kind of given these examples. Don't get hung up on the numbers because most of them are inaccurate. It's important to note that you're really never going to do what I'm doing here in reality. And so these don't all make sense together, but just wanted to kind of go through them. The battery level and battery status is something that when I first started talking to people about it, they were really excited. What that allows you to do is, depending on whether, as an example, in the battery status, determine whether the device is plugged in. So we have folks that use an iPad that's plugged in and it's in kiosk mode, and they unplug it, and maybe they walk around to different areas of their sales floor, as an example. And so they want that behavior to automatically change. The battery status and letting you know how much battery life is left. Maybe if you're about to kick off a really long report that you know is going to take some time, probably want to check to see if there's enough battery life left to make sure that that completes. Air pressure, location. We've got a bunch of information around the accelerometer, magnetic field, and we've included step count. Chris Sippolite put together a pretty cool app for dog walking, as an example, so you could actually track how many steps you took and as you're walking with the dog. But I've seen some really fun stuff done. Someone in our ETS built an app that they then took on their on roller coaster rides and was tracking all the different information from the accelerometer. I think that was mostly for fun, but they made reference to the fact that they may use that for when they make stuff on the roller coaster. So there may actually be a practical use there. But when we set this out, that we didn't really think too much about individual use cases as much as let's just open this up for the community and see what people run with. And so far, that's what we've been seeing is people just off exploring and seeing what they can come up with. I'm sorry, say that again. Oh, the question was, is there much overhead? No, we're just tapping into the OS at this point and asking it for the information. Apple has done an amazing job optimizing for this kind of stuff. It is worth noting that we're making this call, and once we make the call to the OS, we have to wait till what the OS gives us back. So it's doing something else, but it's nothing that's on our side that we're really worried about as far as performance impacts or battery life impacts or anything like that. It gives you information about the magnetic field. I don't remember the exact specifics of that particular sensor, but we can get more. It's all in the documentation. We can look at it. Okay, next up is local notifications. So this one was interesting for us. We know that push notifications is a feature that we did ask for quite often. And I'll actually talk a little bit about how immediately we're delivering push notifications, but we do have longer term plans on ways to address that. But there's some technical hurdles that we've got to overcome first. We've got a general purpose app that we're submitting to the App Store. We don't know all of your devices. And how do we route that notification to the correct device? We really don't have the infrastructure set up for that yet. In the generic FileMaker Go, in the general FileMaker Go, I should say. But local notifications were important to us because we really wanted to finish the story around iBeacons. And also geofence is another example that I'll be actually using here. When we introduced iBeacon support back in 2015, it started off pretty simple, just a calculation. You're able to do a lot of sort of dynamic things with it, which is able to determine whether a beacon is around. And then in FileMaker 16, we added the ability to trigger, basically run a script when it finds it that you've entered before and entered or exited the range of an iBeacon. But it is there was a requirement that FileMaker Go was in the foreground. So there was still really great opportunities for it, but it was a little limited because FileMaker Go had to be in the foreground. And so that's where the configure local notifications came in, because now what we can do is tell the OS, hey, we're looking for a specific event. And in this case, it's either there's one of three options. The device has entered or exited the range of a geofence, entered or exited the range of an iBeacon, or based off of a time delay. So you can go in and say, after this much time, show me a notification. So if you wanted to do something like, I've got a meeting that's coming up, remind me 5 minutes before the meeting, you can take the current time, add the number of seconds that you want, and that person will get a notification even if FileMaker Go is in the background. Just to see this in action, so if I tap example, we let FileMaker Go back into the background, there's my notification, and when I pull it down, you can see that I've actually passed it a title, a description. There is a limit on the description from Apple. I think it's 3 lines worth of text. I can't remember exactly. So there's a little bit of a limitation there. But then you can also configure up to 3 button actions. You can give these whatever names you want. You can have them trigger whatever script you want, and you can have them either bring FileMaker Go into the background or into the foreground, or just leave it in the background. So there's all the things that you can control off from a single script stack. So in the example that I'm using here, we've set up an app where we have all of our customer locations tracked in a geofence, and I'm the salesperson, and maybe I'm going out to that customer's location. Well, since FileMaker Go knows about the geolocation of the customer that I'm going to, as soon as I get close within range, I would get this notification. And maybe I want to see a report and have that ready to go. So as soon as I walk into the office or walk into the meeting with the customer, I've got the pieces that I need. I don't have to go and manually find it. The developer in this case has built it in so that if I get close, but I'm going to stop and grab some coffee, maybe I want to be reminded in 10 minutes, or I'm just not going to work today and I'll dismiss it. There's all the kinds of things, and this is really based on a real world example of things that we've seen customers do. But what's really nice about it is it gives you a good bit of flexibility here, and we're already seeing people do some interesting things with it. But in this case, we'll do view report. You can see it takes me right back into FileMaker Go and displays a gorgeous report that is represented by this dialog. Questions on the local notifications? This is an iOS-only feature at this point. Notifications both on the Mac and Windows side is something that we're interested in doing. It's not there yet. This particular, we're tapping into local notifications is a feature of iOS that we're tapping into. There's a pretty similar thing on the Mac side. Daniel, you probably know better than I on the Windows side how we would tap into notifications in Windows, but that's something that we definitely want to do. But that's probably when we tackle push notifications as opposed to local notifications. I wonder if it's because my iPad is blocking my computer. Is that any better? Hopefully that's better. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about on the Go side is the iOS App SDK. Real quick show of hands, how many people have used the iOS App SDK? It's always interesting. I either get a room of almost no one or almost everyone. So the iOS App SDK is something we introduced, again, in FileMaker 15. And the primary reasoning for it, there were a couple. Number one was deployment. Mobile device management is something that a lot of companies use to deploy to iOS apps. And we wanted a really great way for them to do that on the FileMaker side. The second was branding. Today, and branding kind of breaks into two categories as well. There's the developers wanting to brand their app, and then there's the users trying to find that developer's app. And what we struggle with today with FileMaker Go is you have to explain to someone, go into that app that has a folder, and then inside of that, then you see the one that is your, and then fill in the blank, your custom app. And that just throws people. It's just that even one extra step, they get lost. And so with the iOS App SDK, you're able to now deploy through mobile device management, and you're able to do it with your branding, so your app icon shows directly up on the home screen. Then in FileMaker 16, we built off of that and allowed you to start embedding plugins into your iOS apps. Because prior to that, all the great plugins that are out there would not run on iOS because there was no way for us to build FileMaker Go and get it passed through the App Store where it could run its own code. So now what you can do is you take your FileMaker custom app plugin, you bundle it up in iOS App SDK, and you get basically a native iOS app at that point. And what we're doing in FileMaker 17 is giving the plugin community even more control. So now they'll be able to create their own app delegates and queue FileMaker scripts. And what that means is you can do a lot more as far as tapping into pretty much all of iOS's SDKs that are in there. So HealthKit, HomeKit, Apple Pay, push notifications is one. I'm sure you're familiar with Monkey Bread software plugins. They've got ones out there that he's already started building stuff that leverages our app delegate extension stuff, but he's got a ton of plugins that he's already ported into iOS that you can embed in. And then now what this allows you to also do is then pass information that you get back to FileMaker into your FileMaker custom app using the QScript function. Yes? Practically, I mean, I don't know how you would integrate the ARKit piece, but theoretically, yes. I don't want to promise that, but theoretically, yes. It just depends on what you would be trying to accomplish with that. So this is really helpful for exchanging data, but displaying something in an AR view, I don't know. That's a good question, though. If I didn't repeat it, I'm sorry. The question was, does that include kits like ARKit? And theoretically, yes, but I'd have to play. I'd have to see someone play with it. Is there another question? Okay. So I realize most of us aren't plugin developers, but I think this is something that's really important because there's been so many times where we've had customers that ask, well, can you, on iOS, interface with my proprietary hardware, as an example, or tap into something like HomeKit or HealthKit. And in the past, you've had to say no to that. And now, thanks to what we've introduced in 16 with plugin support, and now even farther with what we're introducing in 17, it really opens the doors for us to say yes to almost all situations. And then maybe in the case of the ARKit.
So you can only use plugins if you bundle it in the iOS.
That is correct. Yeah.
You can't use it in FileMaker.
No, because there's no way for you can't add executable code to something that's already gone through the app's initial submittal process. It's a horrendous security risk for the user if someone could just start going in there and adding functionality that Apple doesn't want to allow. But with the iOS App SDK, what you're doing is you are saying, as the developer, I've taken this plugin, I've bundled it into my app. Now, we don't recommend submitting to the App Store, that people have gone down that path of submitting to the App Store because it's all getting checked with Apple. But otherwise, you would go through the Enterprise App Store, which doesn't have the same level of checks as a public App Store, but Apple still wants to validate that you're not doing something evil, basically. So yes, that's why we don't have it in the generalized Go, but we do have it support for an iOS App SDK. Any general Go questions, feedback, concerns? Yes? Sure. As long as the third-party app supports it. So that's the really important thing here is, Apple introduced drag and drop and split screen a couple of years ago, but we haven't seen 100% adoption by all third-party apps. So as long as the third-party app accepts, I think it's also important to note that not everyone has fully implemented this drag and drop either. So some apps will only support text as an example. So assuming that they are fully supporting the drag and drop functionality, then yes, it's bi-directional. I don't know if Photos lets us drag in. Let me try. Let's go back to my record. I don't think it, oh, it did. Yes, it did. So yes, the answer to that is yes. But again, it's very dependent on the third-party app. In this case, it's built into Apple, so I'm not surprised. It's from Apple. Question, yes. You can do, so the question was, can you use Siri to interface with FileMaker Go? And you can use text dictation. So if you're in a field, which I probably don't have a good field example, since I've got this. So for field dictation or text dictation, yes, but beyond that, not yet. I will say we're very intrigued by the Siri shortcuts that Apple introduced at WWDC, but no promises on how we'll be able to integrate with that. But that is something that potentially could help us there. I don't want to limit the questions to just 17 or the feedback. So if you've got general, and these will include complaints, if you've got any comments or feedback on Go, I'm happy to hear it, or for Pro for that matter. Because I only have one more thing to demo and we're only at 8 o'clock. So you've got me cornered here for the next hour.
I found something for you.
Okay.
If you search on the web for master details beeswax, they have a demo file that.
That's cool.
You know that? Master,
Where did you say it was? Sorry.
master details beeswax. Go down until you see a layout with a bunch of color.
Bunch of color.
That one there.
Oh, this guy. Yeah, I've seen this. This is really cool.
And then zoom in a bit.
How about I open it?
Oh,
You're talking about this one?
yeah.
Yeah, so this is a cool example of the master detail.
So he has a demo that walks over this file and a video that goes with this file, and he tells you how it's done. And basically, he's doing. There's all those hard to see on the screen, gray title bars at the top.
Oh, yeah, they are very hard.
And he's.
There you go. You can see it now.
Yeah. So he's actually, as you click on that, he's changing the view. He's on the same layout the entire time, and he's just using, believe it or not, it's a portal the entire time. And what he's doing is he's using it row and things like that to decide whether or not to show border lines in between different things. And he's sorting the view and doing all sorts of things. It's a cool demo file, and it shows off master detail rather well.
Looks like this is a pretty extensive post too. I hadn't seen this one yet. I'd heard about this MCU file, but I hadn't seen the full article yet.
Somewhere on that page, there's a link to a video.
I have to agree, super cool. It is.
It is.
Wonder if let's see.
All he's doing is like those bars on the top, he's sorting the current record set or doing whatever he needs to do for that view. And the left-hand side is a portal the entire time.
Yep.
And he's doing charts and graphs and all sorts of things. So he sorts on like the year field, and if the year changes between the current row and the previous row, he draws a line in between the rows. It's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I would check this out. I mean, but as you can see here, it's using the current table method, and I'm going to assume that relationships. Yep. Thanks, Keith. That was cool.
Question on the master detail. Can the portal be filtered, or is it strictly outside?
It's strictly the found side. It's mapping exactly to what you're looking at the form level.
You're filtering that portal
By
affecting the
yeah.
concept.
Can you tell me more about why you're like what are you trying to accomplish? I mean, what?
Or you might have a found set of list of customers by name and have a global field where you want to filter it down based on what you're in there. Even though it's within a found set.
You could implement that by using a global field, and you can start typing for every keystroke.
Yeah.
You could modify the found set as you type each. It can all be
I'm
done.
just wondering whether the filtering effect is the same, because switch trigger is a whole different process.
Yeah, it's a different process. This brings in a different way of thinking, but you can do all that with this.
The question of why we're not complaining, just the terminology in the app using table. Not really talking about tables.
You're talking about the fact that we don't refer to this as a table occurrence as an example. I can't speak to the history of that, but it is something that we want to change. So I didn't talk about this, but this is something that we added to help new customers. And this is actually, I think, the first place we ever talk about table occurrences in the UI. So the terminology stuff, I can't speak to why that decision was made in the past, but it is something that we're aware of and want to address in the future.
We didn't know what to call it originally. Internally, we call it table databases. But we didn't know that that would be something that people would want to use. And basically, the user base came up with it.
Well, occurrence is also a reference from tables. You want to delete the table.
Oh yeah. Okay. So maybe it's the second place we do it. Right. If I do. So this might. There's only a couple places, and maybe it's the second place. I think, but I think you know what you're talking about when you delete here. Also remove occurrences. So we don't call it a table occurrence, but we do say an occurrence. Cancel. So yeah, it is something that we want to clean up. But I am curious: is it some? Are you asking that because of you? It's confusing when you were starting, or is it when you're explaining it to new folks, or okay?
This is one of the hardest things to get.
Oh yeah.
That last week was when I started teaching 4-day classes at the beginning that they maybe lying to you for about 3 days. And then I'll reveal the line at the end and give them some groundwork for what you have to relationships, labels, and all.
Yeah, you're not the first. It's funny you say that. You're not the first teacher that I've heard use that same tact of saying I'm either going to lie or admit, lie through admission for the beginning and then come back and explain it. So I encourage you to reach out to me and let's have a conversation, because as we're sitting here thinking about relationships, we're always, this goes to everyone in the room, obviously. Anytime, if you guys got questions or want to know more, shoot me an email. Rosemary, can you give it somehow? Do you have some posts when you post this recording, I guess, just so people have it? But anyway, I'm just so we can bounce ideas off of you. As I said earlier, we're doing a lot of thinking about relationships, and we try to talk to people that do training a lot, because I do a lot of development myself. I talk to a lot of developers, and so I get their mindset pretty well. But trying to understand a new student coming in is extremely helpful. So I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so FileMaker 7 was definitely a big shift for everyone, and so you're probably right there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty tough trying to come up with terms that right. Well, if we're really successful in the future, maybe there's no need for table occurrences. We'll see. Right. Right. Yeah, no, so we have a map that we generated, we had third-party generators. We were doing usability testing, and they really did a great job mapping out the customer journey. And the first valley of death, the first drop-off, is relationships. So we hear it, and I mean, part of like what I showed you the add-on tables earlier, maybe we get to a point where all this stuff is hidden. You don't need to think about it. I mean, I think that's the ideal world. I mean, we want to I want to be clear, we're not going to get to a point where we take away power. But doing it in such a way that the normal person, they just don't have to look under the hood and it all works for them. That would be the ideal. Okay, I want to show. Yes.
I don't know if you've identified it or not, but how many normal people are developing databases as opposed to developing? What's the percentage?
Wait, say that one more time. Sorry.
What's the percentage of, let's say, normal people developing databases as opposed to developers?
I think Lau.
How many people in this room have formal computer science or formal developer training before they start using FileMaker? So once upon a time, you were a normal person.
Well, I was using his terminology.
Well, no. But to my point, FileMaker is a tool that is approachable, and you need to start using it at some point. And you've been doing tons of research over the last several years on the user journey. So if you have a smart business user who's really good at Excel, they outgrow Excel, they pick up FileMaker, and then you hit that value definitely the first time you have to make a relationship.
Right, they don't, relational database is not intuitive. You have to understand how to take that step.
Right, but a lot, most people who come to FileMaker because they're impatient. And so telling them you have to go study relational database design isn't the right answer. And I mean, so that's what we're trying. That's part of what we're trying.
Yeah, and I also think that a lot of those folks will start off on their own and then reach out to you all for help, and they're going to reach out to you more frequently if we can show them up front that there's value in the product. I mean, you guys do a great job reaching out to people and making the sales pitch for us, but a lot of people that just show up on FileMaker.com and download a trial. lots of people, and we want to convert more of those people into ones that are interested and want to reach out to you all. And part of that is getting them past that first valley, because they need to be able to see that FileMaker can do what they're trying to do. Even if they can't get it all the way there, we can just show them. I mean, the example that I did earlier of the starting with meetings and adding attachments, I mean, that seems so silly, it's so small, it's so simple. But when you take someone that is, has never built software before, right? And the idea of building an app is just so beyond what they could even begin to comprehend. And you sit them down and they start off with this app that's not quite what they need, and we show them with just a couple clicks, they have now this new functionality that they added. It's mind blown every time. And mm-hmm.
Now they got something to do with reference.
Right.
Part of teaching, they see how things were added and how they're replicated. Everybody's good at kind of reverse engineering it.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I didn't touch on that earlier, but that was a big reason why we went with the starter apps that we did. I mean, we had sample apps, or what we're referring to as sample apps now, the 16 that we've been shipping. And they were very complex. They did a pretty decent job sort of inspiring people, but it it wasn't easy for them to customize. And so they didn't sort of get that win feeling. And that's why we wanted to the point of sort of reverse engineering, start off as simple as possible. Don't have any bells and whistles, don't have any flair. Just give them the basic pieces that they need. They can start customizing it. The layouts we intentionally made very bland because it sort of invites them to go in and add their own color schemes. And when they go in and they add that add-on table, they didn't need to know anything about the relationship, but then they go into the relationship graph, some downtime, and they can see how that works. And there's no extra stuff. It was very important to us that we didn't have relationships that were there to drive UI like we do in our starter apps, or in the old starter apps rather. These are just the most pure to the essence versions of those samples that we could do. And you're right, you're absolutely right. They can then start taking it apart. They get interested. They get to a certain point, they're hooked at that point, and they reach out to you guys to help finish the job. And again, this is just the beginning. I mean, we want these things we want to expand on that library of add-ons. We want to expand on that library of starters. We want the community to start being able to do it, start sharing it. And so I could see a future where, I'm a school teacher and I come in and I've got an idea of how I want to track something related to my students. And there's already starter apps or samples that I can start taking and just snapping together like Lego pieces, and I'm off running. And then hey, maybe I either continue growing my FileMaker knowledge and I build it out myself, or I realize, hey, this thing kicks ass, but I need a little bit of help, and they go to the community. So I do think this is something that helps everyone involved.
Once you make a custom app on person, you have to keep it a lot of people. So in case that you keep on updating, then if you have one customer, it's very easy to do.
Right.
If you have 10 or 100, is there any quick way or
Not yet, but that's where the XML is going to come in. So our plan is in the future that you would be able to look at the XML, compare two files, see what's different, see if you need to update, inject the changes, only the changes that you need based on the XML. We're trying to figure out, like, for instance, let's say you created an add-on and the add-on was being used, and then you've made an updated version of that add-on. We need to make sure that it's possible for you to say, oh, this add-on is at this version, replace just these pieces. So a lot of work, and it's very tricky, but it's something that the engineering team is working on, and that's definitely the future that we see, is making deploying apps and updating them as easy as possible. Okay, any other questions? Because I do want to show the data migration tool real quick. Real quick, has any raise of hands who has used the data migration tool yet so far? So a couple. Okay, so to demonstrate this, I'm going to use our ETS system again, and I apologize if you've seen the webinar because I've shown this a few times now. But this is a system that was built so far ago that I'm not even sure that we know who built it. Do you know who built this file, Keith? Okay, so quite a while ago. And it's been very classic FileMaker. The person that built it has left, and a bunch of people have added onto it. So it's gotten a little complex. Doesn't have a ton of fields comparative to what I've seen out there from others, but 24 tables is pretty typical of a pretty standard FileMaker app. You can see that this one up here at the top has about 50,000 records in it. In order to migrate data between this version and a new version maybe that I was building, of going through each individual table and importing the records, it took me about 25 minutes. And I actually have a video of myself doing that, going through, importing the field, or mapping all the fields, waiting for it to finish importing, come back, do the next one, hope that I don't screw anything up and have to start all over again. And that's actually not that bad. 25 minutes, I think most people would have killed for. I know people that spend whole weekends doing stuff, and that's something that we really struggle with. We want to give you guys time back as much as possible. And when we hear stories about, I spent my whole weekend away from my family migrating FileMaker data, that pains us. And so that was the big sort of motivator behind doing this data migration tool. So it's something that's available if you're an FBA or if you sign up for FDS. It's just a command line tool. I've actually got it stored in this folder here. I've already done a change directory to get there, and I've got the command typed out. Ooh, I must have hit some stuff. Hold on, let me do that again. So it's going to fail while I'm letting this do this. Okay, there we go. So I've got this command already set up, and what it's going to look for is a original file that has all the data in it, and then a clone. And the clone would be the copy of the file that I've gone in and made some changes to. So let me go ahead and just make a clone of this file. Now, it's important to note a couple of things. I'm not going to step through doing all of them, but if I were to go in here and make changes to, let's say, table names or field names, we are smart enough to try to remap that. We're using a UUID behind the scenes. If I create layout elements, if I create scripts, all that is still going to work. We're really just taking the data and moving it over. So let's go ahead and create a clone copy of the file. And I do want to call out, some people have gotten hung up on this. Once you create this clone, as soon as you open it, it's no longer a clone. So keep that in mind, because we do inject some region information there. So now that this clone file is saved here, it's got no data in it. I've got my original file. Both of these are saved off to my desktop, so I can go ahead and hit enter. And it's going to create a third file for me, and it's taking the data from the original file and my new file with all of its changes in it, and merging them together. And in that time that it took me to describe that, it's already finished. So what was taking me 25 minutes took me, what are we at? We started at 42 seconds, 49 seconds, so 6-7 seconds to do that total migration. So what we're hearing from customers already is, again, that whole weekend that they spent is now 20 minutes. We've taken stuff that was taking people days and taken it down to hours. This is one of the things I've been most excited about, I think, since I've been working in the PM org. The development team that worked on it, I think we all owe them a big round of applause, because this has been something that Daniel, can you take that back to everyone too? This is, again, just giving the time back in day is really important to us. So, yeah. Knock on wood, no, we've had no issues so far. I think the thing that trips people up the most is not understanding the way the clones work. So they'll create a clone and then touch the clone in some way and then close it and not realize, and then all that'll happen is it'll fail. It'll say that that's not a clone. That's tripped some people up, but we haven't seen any issues of bad data coming through or munging anything. Again, I'm knocking on wood here, but so far this has been all positive. So it's just a command line tool, so it can be run from anywhere. I've seen people, you know, I think, trying to think of what companies have put stuff out. We've had companies that have already built sort of wrapper apps to give it a GUI. So you can just drag a file into a container field as an example that's all built in FileMaker and it runs the commands. You could put this up on the server and do some server-side scripting to have it run. In this case, I'm just running it locally on my machine.
Some people are developing scripts for it to take some of the files and go through every single file.
Yeah, so I don't remember the who exactly, but I know that there's been a few developers that have actually built very complex wrappers around this to do multi-file as an example, to store. I mean, in this case, the file is not password protected. You would enter in your normal account information as well as your encryption at rest password if applicable, and they build all of that into the wrapper app. I believe I don't know if they're going to planning on selling it or not, but that's the kind of stuff that people have done already. We intentionally made this a command line tool. We wanted to make this as lightweight as possible because we wanted to get this out as soon as possible. We want to make sure that we get feedback. And as an example, in ETS, we didn't have originally the account management stuff, and that was implemented as based on feedback in ETS pretty late, which we wouldn't have been able to do if this was embedded, for example, into Pro or into Server. But that's not taking it off the table in the future. Once we get this thing rock solid and we're happy and everyone's had an opportunity to give us feedback, we may look at building it into servers as a schedule that you could do, for an example, or maybe it becomes part of the clients. Just not sure yet. I thought, yeah, okay. Question?
The product management question. And I feel some other things. This has some status like not beta but trial. Is that right? Or is it just that it's available only through the FileMaker developer subscription?
Sure. So the question was, is this available as like a trial or a beta, or is it just available? Is it just that it's available through FDS? So yeah, this isn't a trial. This isn't a beta of anything. It's just that it's part of FDS and FBA. But it's fully baked. It's fully tested. It's fully vetted. No plans on any major changes, and that's why we've done betas or trials in the past, like with the data API, because we knew that our API was going to change a little bit. But in this case, we don't anticipate any of that.
So why is this, or why, like the general question, why would something like this only be available through FDS?
That's a good question. So the question was, why is this available just through FDS as opposed to, I'm assuming you mean just in general public? It's something that we've thought about. What we see typically is the average FileMaker user doesn't really struggle with this at all. We've got a lot of people that are in the FDS. We feel like there's a lot of other value in FDS. We've got a lot of people that are in FBA already. That's where the main struggle was being seen, is with those very large deployments. Might be something that we consider making more freely available. I don't know, but at the time it's just an FDS and FBA.
FDS is very affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Get an idea of who's interested in, those things. Yeah.
Right. We haven't, as far as I know, maybe you know, Rosemary, I haven't heard any complaints about that. I mean, most people have been very happy to go to FDS to get it. And again, like I said, there's other value in FDS as well. So if they went there for this and they stay for iOS App SDK, for example, and other things, I think that's good for both us and them.
So even though this was released around the time of 17, it's not 17 specific.
Nope.
How far back do you say?
So it will work with anything in the FOF format and FMP12 format. The Clay, the main engineer that worked on this, I know he said he's tested it back to 13. I don't know if he's seen any issues specifically with 12. Daniel or Keith, have you heard anything that would indicate that it wouldn't go back all the way? Yeah. Right. And this isn't tied to 17, and we again did that intentionally. So if something did come up, I think that we did cover a lot of the feedback as part of the ETS, and we're able to much more easily maneuver because of how lightweight it is. Yeah, that's the statement I've heard a lot.
One of the reasons why it's so fast is it bypasses a bunch of things. The engine has to perform locks and help user mode. This doesn't have to perform locks, so it can, because it's the only user on that file, so it can just blast as fast as it possibly can.
Yeah, we.
Going through the UI.
Yeah, no UI, no.
Well, it's even beyond that. To Keith's point, is we don't have to do any sort of checks for, you know, if it was a multi-user file, we'd have to lock everything down. And so we have seen some requests on for the data migration tool to give better granularity on things. We probably won't do those though, because as soon as we add that stuff in, then you're going to start slowing down the same way as if you went through the manual import process. So if you see stuff that's being requested and we don't do it, we are trying to answer those in the forums and be transparent. But if you're seeing us not do something, it's probably because we don't want to slow down the import. I don't think I have anything else to say specifically about this, but is there any other questions? Yeah.
So I had two different data sets,
Mm-hmm.
and then I made a clone.
Mm-hmm.
Could I run this on both of the originals with the same clone?
You couldn't, but tell me more about what kind of situation would you be in where that would happen?
So I have one particular file that grows a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I end up archiving that
Mm-hmm.
historical stuff. And one thing I'm looking at in reviewing some of this is take that archive stuff, put it all together. Right now, I look at having to do the manual removal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is so much easier, faster. If I could have the one code that I haven't opened yet and run it again on a second shelter file.
Yeah.
That would cause some problems in that we don't know where the data is coming from, the original files or another copy. And if the serial numbers and so forth were at different points, the auto-winner serial numbers, right? For instance, that's just one possible problem, right? They could
Even though I may think that they are unique,
yes,
they may not be.
right, and you might be merging in two different sets that with overlapping IDs. So that might not be a good idea. I mean, well,
So, well, I understand the question. You have a clone, you've imported a bunch, you haven't opened it up, you've imported a bunch of stuff. And then you take a second file, you still haven't opened this one up, even though it has data in it, and you import a second bunch of stuff, and third and fourth and fifth. So what you're doing is you're compiling all of your broken up archives into one giant enormous archive.
as soon as this tool opens the file, it's no longer a clone.
But is it open because it's de facto imported something? Because unless you open it.
Now, there's the localization notice that you mentioned earlier. As soon as the application opens up the file, it has to fill in that localization information based on the current system. And that's being used to determine whether or not it's a clone or not.
So that answers my question. As soon as I run this the first time, even though I haven't opened it, FileMaker says it's no longer a clone.
As soon as this process runs,
Yeah.
so you can't, yeah, currently you couldn't.
Yeah. What I would say is reach out to me. Let me understand more of the use case, and maybe there's some other solution. It might not be this, but it may impact. I mean, we're definitely looking at improving import and the pro product as well. We're focusing more on usability right now, but we are looking at if there's any opportunity for speed improvements. Now, we don't anticipate much speed improvement because it has to do all those checks, but that is stuff that we're looking at. So maybe if you follow up with me, we can have an exchange. And yeah.
Maybe other people understand this better than I do. So I'm trying to understand the entire process. So I have a complete file of an app, and the customer's using it, and we want to make some changes. I make a backup copy of that. I go over here to the developer and make changes to it. And in the meantime, they've changed records over here. So what's the process? What am I cloning? I'm just going to import into my new version. A clone of my new version?
Yeah, so what you'll do is, the setup for those on the phone is we've got a in production version of the file, and we're going to take a backup version of that, and that's what we're going to start doing our development on. And so in the meantime, while I'm doing my development, records are getting added into the production version. So what you would do with this tool is you would make a clone of your developed, your V2 version of your file that you've done offline. And then at some point, when you're not having, you'd have to pause the connection so people aren't adding records or do it off time. You're doing the data migration between that live file that you had, of course, paused or stopped, imported into your clone copy that you've developed. And then you would replace that file that's up on the host.
Okay, and that gets to my real question, which is, that's only going to work if I don't change the fields or calculations.
No, so I did touch on this earlier. So the field names, we're not basing it off field names. It's actually based off of UUIDs. Now, if you add new fields, clearly we don't have a way to import those. We don't have any way to know what you're trying to import into. So you still need to do mapping through the main product at that point. But if you just simply were changing names or impacting calculations, that would still work.
So some schema will be taken over, but if it's totally new schema.
Yeah, there's no way for us to know how you would map that, right? Right, right. And that gets to we do need to figure out and improve the import UI in the client side just to try to help with some of that stuff. But this data migration tool specifically wouldn't cover that particular case. Yes?
Yeah, the manual import allows for field level validations.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that might be changed, even though the field isn't technically redefined, it might have its validation changed in the definition.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to do any checking with that, or is it just going to dump it?
That's a good question. I don't think it does any of that checking because that would slow it down.
So you might end up with invalid data being recorded.
I believe that is true in that case, but I'm not. How would that not though?
Everything in FileMaker is actually a text field.
Everything's a text field.
Yes. You guys have done that for years, right?
But why are
You
number
can-
fields more efficient than this?
That's just because of indexing is unique and different. So
So the index is a number field.
the index is a number field. The field itself is actually a text field. So you can have 2 gig of textual data in a big field. And this tool would just import it from one spot to another.
But I think that's part of the problem because I think what I'm hearing you say is, so you have a field, and let's say the field is saying it will only accept values above 5. But then when you change it to say
Yeah.
it only can accept, you can only accept something that's
It's going to
below
bypass
1.
all that.
Right. So that would be where that is a good gotcha. But
So those records will be imported, even though they're invalid in the new file.
Right.
that is my understanding. Yes.
It is a data, it's a data mover.
It is.
It's not a data validation mover.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's a great point that we should probably do more documentation or upfront documentation to make sure people understand. If we start adding those validation checks in, though, then we've started slowing down.
That's what I assumed you did.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a good point that probably isn't immediately obvious to everyone.
It's a post-processing.
Right.
If you choose to bring over value lists from production line to your phone, maybe you've got to go back and change some of those, change the depth, should be now productions, all kinds of things that maybe needs to be post-processing. Speed improvement of smart rating like that. It's just so huge.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's why we're seeing a lot of people sort of build. It's more. This is just a piece of their sort of puzzle. But the point, I do think that is a gotcha that may not be obvious to people at first.
It's not a.
Yes.
That's why I said maybe you can't understand what that is. But it's not, if you're just transferring data, fine. But if I made schema changes, if I took a field, a name field, and I broke it down, first name, last name.
Yeah, you still have to do the post-processing at that point. Although again, to the point of the speed, I mean, you would have had to do the same thing before. You just would have had to wait. You
There's
know.
no question that it's very fast.
Yeah.
It's just, you still have to
Yeah,
Just take it as 100%.
that's really great feedback that we can take and look at. Rosemary, maybe we want to update the page, the page that has the data migration tool on there to highlight some of those gotchas. But thank you, that's great feedback.
Just to be clear, new schema in the new version of the file is absolutely fine.
Sure, but it's in the case that the example that he was just giving was,
Right. I understand. New schema in the old files since the version was created may cause problems.
yeah, okay, so what you're saying is if that production version, someone went in and started fiddling with stuff and then you tried to migrate, that would cause problems. Yeah, don't do that.
You did all your modifications in one version.
Yeah,
That's bad practice.
right. Right. And again, as I was saying earlier with the add-on stuff in the XML, in the future, some of the cases for data migration may go away. We may be able to do updates to the live file and push changes that way. So we're not ignoring those problems that you have as far as what you need to do post-processing. That's stuff that we want to try to address as well. It's just not with this tool.
Just a quick reminder, I'm going to follow DEFCON one more time. Clay is doing this session at DEFCON that's 100% dedicated to data migration. So basically, under the session on the data migration. So,
Yeah.
come to DEFCON.
And I expect standing room only for that session, so get there early.
I don't know.
I know, but even then, it's definitely the thing that I've been hearing the most about. So we've got about 15 minutes, and I've gotten through all of my demo. So you've got me cornered for at least 15 more minutes. So if you've got general questions, it doesn't have to be about 17 or any of the new features. I'm here. And as I said earlier, I'll try to get Rosemary to post my email. So if you guys want to reach out to me and continue a conversation, I'm happy to have that as well.
Looking for more cool examples of the get sensor.
Mm-hmm.
Website.
No, though.
Look for.
So has there been much on the community yet? I think most of the stuff I've heard sort of back channel.
Yeah, there is a file out there that is like tracking me on my run.
Mm.
And there's a GPS version, and they can map it to, they can collect all the data points from, Apple gives this to you. You can say, on my last run, in the last hour, give me the data points, and you can feed it out to a map and get it.
Yeah, as I said, I think I mentioned earlier, Chris Hippolyte had built one that was similar to that, only it was for dog walking. And is that on our website anywhere, Rosemary?
Yeah, so that is the, if you go to the What's New videos, on the product pages, one of the videos is on the apps. I don't think he made the file available for download.
But you can at least see the example.
But you can see the example.
There might be another one for beeswax. Yeah, beeswax likes to give a lot of different files out.
Are you talking about on this page somewhere, Rosemary?
Yeah, there should be, there might be a custom map tab. Go to custom map tab.
Wait, no, I think it's this one because we've got sensory. Oh yeah, so this has a bunch of, yeah, this is it. Yeah, so check out on our, if you go to the website and then, what do we do, platform and then what's new, there's some pretty good examples here down at the sensory. Where did I just see that at? Okay, so about quarter way down the page. Watch that video and there's some examples there. It's still early. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I had seen was in ETS when people were just kind of kicking the tires and playing with stuff. That's where the roller coaster example came from. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we're only about a month in, but people start posting sample wise.
That seems cool if they could actually collect. I was going 7 miles on that turn and get this much
this many.
Yeah, he was really happy with what he was able to get out of it so far. So, but I haven't seen anything new recently. I don't remember. It was some. What's that? So Ronnie did something. This was I didn't realize this was a customer that built a roller coaster one. I didn't realize that. Yeah, I didn't realize that Ronnie had built one too. But Ronnie Rios, I know, has built. He had a couple of examples, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So what's Ronnie's passion? He's riding roller coasters. So he's been playing with it. I know the SEs are working on demo kit files, and those will be out in the next couple of weeks in the community. And I know there's monitor sensor data. So.
Cool. There's a Six Flags right next to DevCon. So I know there are people planning a field trip. We will get Ronnie's demo file and we'll try it out.
Yeah, Ronnie's threatening to skip DevCon entirely to go to Six Flags.
We should build that into DevCon to go. Any other questions? It's on the list. I won't make any promises. It's something that we've looked at a couple of times. We weren't thrilled with the accuracy. English was okay. I think we were in the high 80s accuracy, which I still don't think is good enough. But when we looked at Asian languages, it dropped off pretty substantially. So we're not, it's still something we're very interested in. We just don't know if it's to our standards yet. So, but we're very, the technology is evolving pretty quickly. So we're going to continue looking at that.
It's true. I think small things.
And are you looking at it just from a gathering the data from it, or yeah, okay. So one of the things that, especially on the Go side, that we're always looking at is how can we get data entry more efficiently, and OCR has been at the top of that list. But it doesn't. One of the things that we were a little concerned about is because what we know people want is I have this paper. I'm moving off of paper processes, so I want to very quickly OCR and scan my data into my app. But if you're at 80%, you're going to have to OCR and then sit there and read through it and try to find it, and we're not convinced that that's any faster yet. But yes, OCR, if that technology gets there, is something we're very interested in.
Behind the scenes, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm. You made Daniel smile behind you. I'm calling Daniel out. No, it's because of what we wanted to do, and we were already using XML behind the scenes. That's why we chose XML. It was purely a how quickly can we do this. But having a JSON version of this isn't off the table. It's something that JSON is here. It's not even the future. It's what people are used to using. So this was purely we wanted to get the add-on tables, the default fields, and all the stuff that's sitting behind that out as quickly as possible. So XML was the path of least resistance. So we're already seeing people start to do that, especially now that we've got container and scripting support. And we're going to keep our eye on that and see what people do with it and see if there's ways that we can improve it. So yeah, we're seeing that a good bit already, or interested in it at least. I don't know that anyone's actually done it, deployed it fully, but it's definitely interesting.
So with the migration tool, so you have, let's say you've got a revised version of the file, you've got the old file. You have to make a clone.
Yes, that's, yeah, when you're dumping data into, say that one more time? No, so the question was, if you've got a data file, do you have to make a clone before you can do it, or does the tool itself make the clone? And no, the answer is you have to create the clone first. That's what it's looking for, is a clone. Again, in the future, the idea of pointing it at a file and it creating the clone first, maybe that's something that we could consider. So that's good feedback. But right now it does require that you're importing directly into a clone.
So if you have to specify 3 paths,
No, so you're only specifying, you're only specifying the path of the file that has data in it and the clone. And then wherever those files are, we spit, or I'm not sure, does it keep, do you know which one it keys off of? Is it the, so you could, we're giving it 2 paths, and I know that it's putting the new migrated file next to one of them.
Because you're not giving it a folder.
Right, it's creating it next to whatever one of those files. I'm not sure which one it is though. So it's just creating it next to it. Like what happened here. I only gave it 2 paths, and then it created the migrated file here on my desktop.
But I think it puts a folder in that, because otherwise we'd have to rename all the files. And then you'd have to turn around and rename.
So in this case it is, because it's giving it, it's naming this file ETS reports migrated. So it's putting, so here's my original file, here's my clone, and then it spits this one out. But what I'm not sure of is it looking at the location of the original file, or is it looking at the location of the clone to copy the file? I guess I could if I moved things and started doing.
Something here, this. And you have a folder called A on the desktop.
But then I've got a Keith.
you can run it on the desktop or on a server or on 2 servers.
The files have to be local to the disk that the command tool is running on. You can't do it pointed at like a hosted file or another file, for example. But you could run it on the FileMaker server. You know, how you have your clone saved up there, your backup saved off, and then do it that way.
And you could save it on to another server.
You could save it locally and then move it to another server using scripting. Yeah, but it's in and of itself, it's all local. Let's do that. Did it lose? Why did it lose all of the ones I just ran? Okay.
Is that in a different window? The history
Oh, it may not. It may have been. Hold on.
per window.
No, this is my main window. All right. I don't know. I'm not going to bore people with this right now, but well, we can find out. It's definitely dumping it next to one of the files here. You know, in this case, it was on my desktop. We've only got a few more minutes. Any other questions? Couple on the back. How? So the question was, how accurate are the range beacons? Boy, does that depend on the beacon itself, because you can set up the strength of the field to determine how close you need to be to the beacon. We're not handling it all. It's all handled by the OS. So we're iOS and the device. So we're basically saying, hey, be on the lookout for this beacon. And then when the device recognizes that when it's come in range, then it sends the notification back to FileMaker Go. But I will say I've tested a lot of beacons, and it seems to depend on the beacon manufacturer. And again, that has nothing to do with FileMaker Go itself. Like if you just use the generic tool or you built your own in Xcode, you would see the same results. So it depends on the device itself. But if you attend DevCon, you'll see we're using them in all the meeting rooms, and we did last year as well. And I don't remember hearing any complaints. It seemed to work pretty well. Yeah, this will be the 3rd year. And I do know, I mean, if you look at how Apple uses it in the Apple stores, they've got beacons at each of the different stations. And if you've got the Apple app set up and you get close to like the iPads, it'll show you information about the iPads. So it can be dialed in pretty close. The other thing to factor in is if you put a wide range on it, walls aren't a good place. You know, you don't want to be on the other side of the wall. That definitely impacts it. Other things that are going to get in the way can cause blocks. I think we set up a couple of beacons in each room. Is that how we're doing it? So that it gives you better. Your exact position? No.
Yeah, and the problem is they also, they'll start to interfere with each other, and FileMaker Go will get confused. It starts to pick up a lot of beacons. It'll say, oh, I found a beacon, you're in nowhere.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're getting what we're getting back from the device. So you've got to make sure that, to Rosemary's point, that you're not overcrowding the devices. And again, if you were testing with just a generic app that wasn't FileMaker Go, you would see the same behavior. And similarly, I mean, the geofence, I think, is probably a little bit more accurate in that regard. And I've seen that one where, I mean, again, that's not giving you the fine tune. It can't tell me that I'm right here, obviously. But if you put it around the building, and as you get close to that building, that works pretty accurately. Other question? Tell me more about that. Like, can you give an example? Mm. It's not the highest thing on our priority list, but it's definitely something that's on our radar, if that helps. I would, if you can reach out to me, send me an email, and we can have a conversation and look at use cases. So anything, when you guys send feature requests in, the use cases help us a lot. It helps us understand the problem, but it also helps us prioritize. So we can better understand how many customers are we going to help with this. It helps us, again, just prioritize against all the other things that we're working on. So if you reach out to me, we can have a conversation about the use cases, and that'll definitely help us. Yeah. I thought I saw one other hand. Was that it? Any other questions? All right. Well, we've only got a couple minutes, so I guess we can. Oh, let's make sure there's no questions on the call. So there was a question here on in the comments. So there's one comment, I guess, here that says, FYI, dual monitors are a problem when going from browse to layout. The inspector resized into the second monitor. So we are aware of that problem. As I think I mentioned earlier when I first started looking at it, we really want the feedback around how the side panels are working, because we want to make sure that we dial that in. One idea that we have played with is, instead of having the browse mode and layout mode be one window, maybe we separate it, or give you the option to separate it, so that layout mode is always layout mode, and when you want to look at browse mode, that's a completely separate window, so you're not having that weird bounce back and forth. So I'd be very interested on people's thoughts. Go off and think about that, and send me an email. You like it or you don't like it. But that is something that we'll continue to fine tune. And then James had a question here. Will the migration tool reconnect photos that are stored on the server? I'm not sure that I understand that question. Oh, okay.
So therefore, it's not a matter of reconnecting. It's just going to work.
So I hope you heard Keith's explanation. It's just a path. It's just text. So that should work magically.
But when you have to move the photos, the graphics of yourself, you have external containers or migration.
It's just a path.
The database is not. There's no need to migrate the pictures. They're just there.
So if you've got images stored in a container, then yes, we're migrating it for you as part of the migration tool. But if you've got the images stored in externally, then all we're migrating is the path that we've stored to reference those.
So you have to move those.
No.
They stay where they are.
They stay wherever they are, and the data migration
You're
tool.
going on to a different server, for example, from the test development server to the production server.
Yeah.
So in that case, you'd have to because it's all new paths, right?
Not a new path.
Well,
Just
you could handle the.
Where it was. You just pick up the RC here to the folder, move it along.
So you wouldn't have to change the path at all. It would just work still in that case.
We just keep track of the head.
Right, but if you change the files or you change the folders that they were in, that would be post-processing you would have to do.
It's probably a reason for this. These pipeline files that people are creating.
Yeah, potentially. But yeah, okay. All right. Well, we're at 9:01. Oh, you're welcome. Again, I really do hope to keep